Why is no one searching his bag? That single question shattered the calm inside Flight 932. A white woman, convinced that a quiet black man near the emergency exit was hiding something dangerous, stood up mid-flight and pointed straight at him. Her voice was sharp, her accusations louder than the engines outside, but what she and the rest of the passengers didn't know was that the man she was targeting wasn't just any traveler, he was someone whose identity would silence an entire plane. In a country still grappling with racial profiling and snap judgments, this story echoes Maya Angelou's warning. Prejudice is a burden that confuses the past, threatens the future, and renders the present inaccessible. So what happens when bias picks the wrong target? Stick around. If this story makes you think twice, don't forget to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and be part of this growing community of voices that demand better. Flight 932 was boarding under a clear afternoon sky at JFK Airport. Inside the cabin, the steady hum of passengers arranging their carry-ons filled the air. The lighting was cool and sterile, reflecting softly off the smooth plastic overhead bins and teal leather seats. Near the emergency exit, seat 18A remained vacant until Marcus Bell stepped on board. Dressed in a tailored dark suit and a light blue shirt, Marcus carried himself with quiet authority. He moved through the narrow aisle with ease, nodding politely when someone met his eye, and offering a calm "excuse me" as he passed by a family struggling with luggage. He looked like a businessman or a government worker, serious, composed and focused. But that wasn't how Emily Carter saw him. From seat 22B, Emily watched him closely. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a navy blouse and black blazer. She had noticed Marcus the moment he stepped into the cabin. Something about him felt off. Not wrong exactly, just unfamiliar. Maybe it was how he seemed so calm, or how he kept glancing at his bag, like he was worried someone might take it. Her fingers tapped restlessly on the armrest as her mind began racing. As Marcus reached his seat and sat down, he pulled out a small plastic pill organizer, checked the compartments, and tucked it back inside his bag. He then opened a paperback and began reading. To anyone else, it was a completely normal scene. But to Emily, it was a red flag. She leaned into the aisle slightly and caught the attention of a flight attendant passing by. "Excuse me," she whispered. "I'm not sure if it's safe to have him." She nodded toward Marcus, sitting near the emergency exit. "You know, with everything going on in the world." The flight attendant, Linda, blinked once, and then smiled politely. "Ma'am, all passengers seated in those rows meet the safety requirements. Is there something specific that concerns you?" Emily shook her head lightly, feigning uncertainty. "Just a gut feeling, I guess." Linda didn't push further. She nodded and continued on, but her expression stiffened slightly. Back in her seat, Emily's anxiety sharpened. Her eyes never left Marcus. Every time he shifted, every time he reached into his bag or looked out the window, her mind spiraled deeper. Her heart raced as she recalled headlines and news stories, the fear-mongering from her favorite talk shows. She glanced around the cabin. No one else seemed concerned. Why wasn't anyone paying attention? Meanwhile, Marcus remained completely unaware. He was absorbed in his book, occasionally sipping water and adjusting the airflow from the vent above his head. He was tired. This flight to Seattle was just another long leg in a grueling week of travel. His thoughts were already on the next day's meeting, a critical milestone in the investigation he was quietly overseeing, but he couldn't afford to look tense. That wasn't part of the cover. Suddenly, a sharp voice broke his concentration. "Excuse me." It was Emily again, louder this time. She had stood up halfway and was pointing directly at him. "This man keeps checking his bag. It's suspicious. I don't feel safe." The cabin went quiet. Heads turned. Marcus looked up slowly, blinking in confusion. Linda rushed over, placing a hand gently on Emily's shoulder. "Ma'am, please lower your voice." "He's up to something," Emily insisted, her eyes wide, chest rising and falling quickly. "I've been watching him. He's nervous. He's hiding something. I want that bag searched now." Rising tension spread like a ripple through the rows. Linda glanced at Marcus. He met her gaze with an expression of calm patience, but said nothing. "Sir," Linda asked gently, "is everything okay?" "Yes," Marcus said evenly, setting his book on his lap. "I'm just reading and minding my business." The moment lingered in the air, heavy and charged. Then, Marcus reached into his bag. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out the same pill organizer, opened it, and showed it to Linda. "I have a heart condition," he said simply. "I check my medication because I have to." Falling action came swiftly. Linda nodded and turned back to Emily. "Ma'am, he's done nothing wrong. Please take your seat." Emily hesitated, then sat down stiffly, crossing her arms. Still glaring around them, murmurs resumed, and the tension slowly drained from the cabin. Marcus picked up his book and tried to return to his reading, though his pulse was now elevated. The resolution, though temporary, came in silence. The plane continued taxiing. The engines roared to life. But for Marcus Bell, this wasn't over. Not yet. 30 minutes into the flight, the cabin had settled into a steady rhythm. The fastened seatbelt sign had been turned off. Passengers had spread out into their personal routines. Headphones on, laptops open, books half read. The drink cart rattled gently down the aisle. But in seat 22B, Emily Carter's world was anything but calm. Her gaze hadn't left Marcus Bell. She sat stiffly, arms crossed over her chest, heart pounding with suspicion. Every few minutes, Marcus would reach into his bag again, pull something out or shift something around. It was likely nothing. But in Emily's mind, it was everything. Her thoughts played like a highlight reel of every sensational news clip she'd ever seen. Explosions, threats, passengers saying "I knew it" after the fact. She wasn't going to be one of those people who ignored her instincts. She leaned toward the man next to her, a gray-haired gentleman doing a crossword puzzle. "Excuse me," she whispered, glancing toward Marcus. "Have you noticed him? The man near the emergency exit? He's been messing with that bag since takeoff." The man blinks, squinting toward Marcus. "He looks fine to me. Probably just reading or something." Emily shook her head. "You're not watching close enough. People always look normal until it's too late." The man gave a polite smile and returned to his puzzle. Frustrated, Emily looked across the aisle at a young woman listening to music. She tapped her arm. "Sorry to bother you, but doesn't that guy over there seem off to you?" The woman removed one earbud. "Who?" "The black man near the emergency exit. He keeps checking his bag. He's been doing it since we left the ground." The woman raised an eyebrow and glanced over. "He's just reading. Honestly, I hadn't noticed." Emily sighed, more irritated than before. "That's the problem. No one notices until it's too late." The young woman turned back to her music, clearly uninterested. Emily sat back, jaw tight, eyes laser-focused. Marcus, still unaware of the growing storm a few rows behind him, was checking his water bottle. He took a sip, then returned it carefully to the seed pocket of his carry-on. His mind wandered. He thought about the case files he had encrypted on his laptop, and the meeting tomorrow with the federal task force. He didn't know it yet, but his every move was fueling a fire he couldn't see. The climax arrived like a pressure cooker exploding. Emily stood up again, this time more forcefully. Her voice was louder, enough to stop nearby conversations. "Why is no one checking that man's bag? He's hiding something. I know it." Heads turned. A baby started crying somewhere near row 28. Marcus slowly looked up again, confused and now slightly concerned. Linda, the flight attendant, moved quickly to intervene. "Ma'am, please, let's keep our voices down." "No," Emily barked. "I've tried to tell you. He's a threat. And if you don't search his bag, I will." "Ma'am," Linda began, trying to calm her. But Emily had already turned toward Marcus, her hand trembling with fury. As she pointed, "Open that bag, right now." Marcus exhaled, long and steady. "I'm not sure what you think I have," he said, voice calm, "but I'm not doing anything wrong. I don't feel safe." Emily snapped. None of us should. A tense silence hung over the cabin. Some passengers leaned into the aisle, eyes wide. Others pulled out their phones ready to record. The tension felt electric, waiting to spark into something uncontrollable. Linda stepped firmly between them. Ma'am, sit down. Now, you are causing a disruption. Emily's chest heaved, but she hesitated. She could feel the passengers' eyes. Some looked annoyed, others confused. She realized she was alone in her panic. Falling action came like a wave receding from the shore. Emily finally dropped into her seat, arms folded, lips pressed into a thin white line. Linda remained standing between them, her posture firm. Marcus slowly turned back toward the window, pulling his book onto his lap again. But he didn't open it. He stared outside at the endless sky, a storm of emotions tightening in his chest. Resolution, if it could be called that, was thin and temporary. The cabin resumed its quiet, though it wasn't the same quiet as before. It was heavier. Suspicious glances were now aimed at both Emily and Marcus. No one really knew what had just happened. Only something had shifted. Emily didn't speak again. Not yet. But her eyes kept darting toward Marcus, and her thoughts were far from over. And Marcus? He knew this flight wasn't just another trip, knew that sometimes dignity was the most dangerous thing a black man could carry on board. The air inside the cabin had become noticeably heavier. Although the seatbelt sign remained off and the engines hummed steadily, there was an underlying tension that clung to everything, an invisible fog of unease. A few rows back from the center of it all, passengers whispered quietly or avoided eye contact altogether. But Emily Carter sat like a fuse waiting to be lit. Her eyes never left Marcus Bell. She had tried to sound the alarm. She had warned everyone, Linda the flight attendant, the people around her, and still, nothing. It was like they were all under some spell, refusing to see the obvious. Marcus kept reaching into that same bag. He kept fidgeting, adjusting, checking, and now, everyone acted like she was the problem. Emily clenched her jaw and leaned into the aisle again, her voice low but urgent. You all saw it. She whispered to no one in particular. He's up to something. Why won't anyone do anything? The teenage boy across the aisle shot her a wary glance before returning to his earbuds. Meanwhile, Marcus was doing his best to remain composed, but the truth was, the situation had begun to wear on him. He could feel the energy shifting, the glances, the hush. He hadn't done anything wrong, and yet the suspicion clung to him like a wet coat. He turned the page of his book, but the words blurred. He wasn't reading anymore. He was just trying to disappear into the paper. The rising action escalated when Linda returned, this time joined by a second flight attendant, Jim, a calm older man with a reassuring voice. They exchanged a glance before approaching Emily. Ma'am, Linda said gently, we need you to remain seated and avoid any further disruptions. I'm not trying to cause trouble, Emily insisted, her voice trembling with indignation. I'm trying to prevent it. He's acting suspicious. I want that bag searched. Jim stepped in. Ma'am, we've reviewed the situation. Mr. Bell has shown no signs of danger, and we are monitoring everything closely. If anything changes, we will act accordingly. Emily stood again, pushing past Linda's words. Monitoring? She snapped. That's not enough. This is how tragedies happen. People ignore the signs until it's too late. That was the breaking point. The climax erupted in a burst of fear and frustration. Emily stepped into the aisle and pointed directly at Marcus. You! Open that bag! Let them see what you're hiding. Marcus slowly looked up, eyes locking with hers. His voice, when it came, was low but clear. Ma'am, I've asked for nothing except peace and space. I have no obligation to prove myself to you. I have a right to feel safe, Emily shouted. And I have a right to not be accused without cause, Marcus replied evenly. Passengers stirred. Some pulled out phones. Others looked toward the flight attendants for guidance. The energy in the cabin teetered on the edge of something dangerous. Linda stepped between them again, her voice firmer now. Enough. Ma'am, if you do not sit down, we will be forced to inform the captain. But Emily wasn't backing down. Fine. Then get the captain, because I'm not sitting here and waiting for him to pull something out of that bag. Marcus sighed and slowly stood up. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small leather badge case. With deliberate care, he flipped it open. My name is Marcus Bell. I'm a federal investigator with the Department of Justice, he said calmly, holding the badge up for everyone nearby to see. I'm on official business, and the only thing I'm hiding is my patience. The falling action was instant. Passengers gasped. One woman near the front clapped her hand over her mouth. A man whispered, "Oh my God," under his breath. Emily's face went pale. Marcus looked toward Linda. If you'd like to verify it, the phone number is on the back. You can call it now. Linda took the badge, examined it quickly, and nodded. It's real, she said quietly to Jim. Marcus tucked the case back into his jacket and sat down again without a word. The resolution settled over the cabin like a blanket. A murmur of shock rolled through the rows. People turned away, embarrassed. A few apologized with their eyes. Phones were slowly lowered. The narrative had shifted entirely. Emily sank into her seat, stunned and silent. She looked around at the people she thought would back her up, but now no one met her gaze. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just returned to his seat, picked up his book, and began reading again. This time, the words came clearly, but he knew better than to believe it was truly over. The plane soared through the sky at 35,000 feet. But inside the cabin, the mood was far from elevated. Even with the tension seemingly diffused, a strange stillness lingered in the air. The hum of the engines, the occasional clink of ice in plastic cups, and the rustle of newspapers were all that filled the silence. Yet beneath it all, an undercurrent of unease persisted. Emily Carter sat in the rear section of the plane, isolated and fuming. Her shoulders were tense, her arms crossed tightly, and her eyes locked straight ahead. But her mind refused to let go. The humiliation of being wrong, of being dismissed in front of strangers, gnawed at her like a dull blade. She couldn't accept it. Something about Marcus Bell still didn't sit right with her. She muttered to herself under her breath. That badge could be fake. Anyone can say they're federal. Jim, the senior flight attendant, stood nearby, watching her like a hawk. He had dealt with dirtittle passengers before, but this one wasn't just anxious. She was fixated. In the front cabin, Linda quietly approached Marcus. "Mr. Bell," she said gently, "I just wanted to thank you again for staying calm. I know that couldn't have been easy." Marcus closed his book and looked up. "You don't get used to it," he said simply. "But I've learned not to give them more fuel." Linda nodded. Her voice hushed. "We've notified the captain. He's informed airport security. They'll be waiting when we land." Marcus gave a quiet sigh. "That's probably wise." Rising action began again when Emily leaned out of her seat, catching the attention of a young man seated across the aisle. "You really believe all that?" she hissed. "You think that badge means anything? This is exactly how people slip through the cracks. They lie, and we fall for it." The man shifted uncomfortably and looked away, clearly uninterested. But Emily wasn't done. She turned to Jim. "You're all being fools. You think showing some shiny piece of metal proves anything? He's hiding something. I know it." Jim kept his tone neutral. "Ma'am, please keep your voice down." "Don't ma'am me," she snapped. "You'll regret ignoring me." The climax struck as the plane began its gradual descent into Seattle. The seatbelt sign dinged on, and Captain Harris's voice came over the intercom, announcing final approach. Passengers began putting away laptops, tightening seatbelts, and bracing for landing. But at the back of the plane, Emily stood up. It was subtle at first, just a small motion, a shift from her seat, but Jim noticed immediately. "Ma'am, you need to sit down," he said firmly. Emily's voice was a sharp whisper. "I'm not letting him walk off that plane without someone knowing the truth." Jim moved closer. "If you don't sit down now, I'll have no choice but to report this as a threat to the captain." Emily hesitated. Her breathing was shallow, hands twitching with rage. Then she turned back and sat, but her head was shaking violently. "You'll all see. You are protecting the wrong man." Falling action followed as the plane touched down on the runway with a smooth bump. A collective exhale swept through the cabin. Marcus looked out the window at the gray Seattle sky and felt the relief of solid ground, but he stayed seated, knowing the situation wasn't quite over. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Linda approached his row once more. "We've coordinated with airport security," she said quietly. "They'll escort her off first. We're doing everything we can to ensure you don't have to interact with her again." Marcus gave a small nod. "Appreciate that." Passengers began standing and pulling luggage from overhead bins, but the area around Marcus remained still. Jim moved to the back of the plane, standing beside Emily's seat. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "please come with us. Officers are waiting at the gate." Emily stood slowly, looking around. No one offered her a sympathetic glance. No one moved to speak on her behalf. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She followed Jim in silence, her exit marked by the kind of quiet that only happens when a room agrees someone went too far. The resolution was quiet and heavy. Marcus remained in his seat, letting the crowd thin before rising. As he stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge, he caught sight of Emily being met by two uniformed officers. She tried to explain, her voice strained, but they listened with unreadable faces. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. The truth had landed long before the wheels did. The jet bridge was filled with the usual shuffle of footsteps, rolling suitcases, and the low hum of relieved passengers ready to leave the tension of the flight behind. But for Marcus Bell, the storm hadn't passed just yet. As he stepped into the terminal, cool air swept across his face, but it did little to wash away the emotional weight clinging to his shoulders. He spotted the two TSA officers immediately, one male, one female, both standing just beyond the gate, with calm but alert expressions. Off to the side, Emily Carter stood with her arms crossed and a defensive scowl on her face. She was still talking, her words animated, though muffled by the glass. From her gestures, Marcus could tell she was still trying to convince them she had done the right thing. He didn't break stride. "Agent Bell?" the female officer asked as he approached. "That's me," Marcus said, offering his credentials. "Flight crew informed you of the situation?" "We got the report," the male officer said, glancing at the badge, then nodding. "We just need a quick statement, and then you're free to go." Marcus looked over at Emily, who had paused in mid-sentence to glare at him. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You're seriously just letting him walk away?" she shouted. People in the terminal turned to look. "I did this to protect you," she continued, her voice rising. "He could be anyone." The officers didn't flinch. "Ma'am," the male officer said firmly, "please lower your voice. We'll continue our conversation in private." Emily's mouth opened again, but she caught the stares of those around her. Passengers from the flight, airport staff, strangers. Some were shaking their heads, others were whispering. No one stood by her side. The rising action built again as Marcus gave his statement. Calm, professional, just the facts. He explained how he had remained cooperative, showed his badge, and avoided escalating the situation despite repeated public accusations. The officers thanked him, assured him they would follow procedure with Emily, and released him to continue on his way. But as Marcus walked toward baggage claim, the weight of what had just happened didn't fall away so easily. The climax struck not with shouting, but with silence. Standing beside Carousel 7, Marcus waited as the black rubber belt creaked to life. Around him, people picked up their suitcases, families reunited, and travelers made phone calls about being back on the ground. But Marcus stood still, his hands in his pockets, his face calm but distant. He didn't hear Emily anymore. He didn't need to. He thought about how close things had come to unraveling. If he hadn't kept calm, if he'd raised his voice, if he hadn't had that badge in his pocket, he thought about the dozens of Essens who hadn't said a word in his defense, not out of cruelty, but out of fear or maybe just discomfort. And he thought about how none of this was new. The falling action came in the form of a voice. "Hey, Agent Bell?" Marcus turned. It was the teenage boy from the plane, the one Emily had tried to warn. He stood holding his backpack, looking sheepish. "I just wanted to say," the boy hesitated, then nodded. "You handled that better than most people ever could. Sorry I didn't say anything up there." Marcus gave him a small smile. "You don't owe me anything, but thank you." The boy offered a nod, then disappeared into the crowd. Finally, Marcus spotted his suitcase sliding around the corner. He grabbed it, adjusted the strap on his shoulder, and headed toward the exit. The resolution came not with justice or apology, but with quiet resolve. Outside the terminal, Seattle's overcast sky hung low, the air cool and damp. Marcus stepped to the curb, flagged down a taxi, and climbed in. "Downtown, please," he said. As the car pulled away, Marcus glanced once more at the terminal shrinking behind him. He didn't know what consequences Emily Carter would face, or if she'd ever understand what she'd done, but he knew who he was, and he knew what he represented for the people watching, for the boy who'd spoken up, for the flight crew who chose calm over chaos. And that, for now, was enough. The car merged onto the freeway, the city skyline in the distance. Marcus sat back, breathing evenly, eyes forward. He had a case to work, a mission to complete, and a world that wasn't going to change unless people like him kept showing up with grace, strength, and truth. In a world that often rushes to judgment, Anu reminds us that dignity can be mistaken for danger when filtered through fear and prejudice. Like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." This story teaches us the power of composure in the face of false accusation, and how truth doesn't need to shout, it simply needs to stand firm. Just as a storm doesn't make the mountain tremble, a person grounded in truth won't be shaken by chaos around them. If this story moved you, challenged your thinking, or reminded you of something bigger than yourself, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe so we can keep telling stories that matter. Your voice helps this community grow, and trust me, it means more than you know.